Sensory is not a reward. Sensory is a human need. We would not give someone their medication because they were good or bad. We would give it because they need it. We give glasses to people who need glasses. We need to have sensory regulation opportunities for everyone in our classrooms, in our therapy offices, in our homes, because we may need it at different times. That mindset has to shift. You don't get to go to the sensory corner because you've been good or you did your work. You get to go to the sensory corner so you can do your work, so you can be the best part of you at school, home, or therapy.
Hello, and welcome to the Neurodiversity Voices Podcast. I'm your host, Paul, and we're thrilled to have you join us on this journey of exploration, advocacy, and celebration of neurodiversity. Together, we'll have meaningful conversations, share inspiring stories, and challenge misconceptions about neurodiversity. This podcast is for everyone, whether you're neurodivergent yourself, an educator, a parent, or just someone curious to learn more. Our goal is to amplify voices, foster understanding, and spark change in the way we view and support neurodiversity. We're so excited to have you as we celebrate the beauty of diverse minds and work toward a more inclusive future. So sit back, relax, and let's get started. Welcome to the Neurodiversity Voices Podcast. Today's guest is Cynthia Miller-Lautman, an occupational therapist whose work bridges sensory science and neurodiversity-affirming practice. From her formative years at Summit School to training with the Cree Board of Health, she's learned to watch the person and to build sensory-safe spaces that turn so-called behaviors into signals we can support. We'll unpack the 8 senses, show how to set up a microsensory safe spot at school or home, and talk about changes clinics and classrooms can make tomorrow. Cynthia, let's begin with your path. What early clinical or personal experiences most shaped how you look at sensory regulation today?
Okay, thank you. Yes. When I think back to my earliest days, I realized that I didn't learn a lot of what I know now in my schooling. So I really needed to learn on the job. So I had my first stage, my last stage as an occupational therapist at a special needs school. And it was there that I met an occupational therapist who was my mentor. And I still credit her for how she taught me how to think about sensory. I was getting lost in all the assessments and the tools and all the lingo and, as you say, like the science-y part of it. And I was having trouble of how to communicate it in a report to a teacher. And so my first alone client, I was working with a young student who was autistic, and he was non-speaking, and he had very, very limited eye contact. And so he would kind of do his own thing until we got into the sensory room. And that's where I learned to be an occupational therapist who does sensory activities, because I would roll him, bounce him on a ball, give him vibration, give him a massage, and he would come alive. He would start making eye contact and actually communicating with small words. He would smile and giggle and actually have lots of circles of communication. So I learned really early that by doing sensory activities, it can really help someone, communicate and form bonds and relationships. And so that was really, that stuck with me, that first client that I worked with. And later on, I moved on and had my own children. And that was probably the next experience that really taught me. I had first a very colicky firstborn baby, and I had no idea what I was doing. And I started to learn how just typically developing children can have sensory issues from birth. They need to be rocked and coddled and bounced and soothed. So that taught me again, my brain was going and I was thinking so much about that. And it comes to my third daughter and my third child. And when she was born, she developed meningitis. She was 5 days old and she spent a lot of time in the hospital. And any parent that has had a premature baby or a child that gets sick can know the impact of all those tubes and things on their children and how much that can create a mini sensory trauma for them. And that's where I started to learn how hospitalizations and dental offices and all of that can shape how people respond to the world and sensory world. So that was another learning. And then my last story, which really sticks with me, and this was really 10 years into my practice, but again, I was still learning. And I had a mom come who desperately wanted to be part of all the therapy sessions. And I loved it because to me, the parents are hand in hand. It's not me just doing the therapy outside and the parents watch. They're part of it. And she and her son taught me that sometimes the first words can take place during a sensory activity. So after 18 weeks of working together, her goal was her son to talk, but we did that through sensory experiences. And I'll never forget, she was sitting in the swing with him in my office with a cushion on him and swinging back and forth. And he said his first words. And the tears of joy, I learned how important it is to involve the parents. It's not remove the child and do the therapy. To me, it's really a family process. And I spent equal time working with mom as I did with a child because it's both. As parents, we don't know this journey and it's new and we don't have a roadmap for our neurodiverse children. So it's really important that we work hand in hand and there's equal time for the parents. So that's my last story that I think really shaped me.
You often say, watch the person. What does that look like in real time when you're meeting someone for the first session?
So I'm always observing. That was one thing I learned as an OT is that all these tests are important, but your observation skills are even more. So when I say watch a person, I mean, first, I'd actually ask the person if they can speak. I would ask them. If it's a little child, what do you want to try first? What do you like? And I would ask. If they cannot speak, I would ask their caregiver, their parent accompanying them. If it's someone older, I would ask the parent if it's for a child, or I would ask the children if it's for their parent, to tell me a little bit about. But then the watching, what's really the watching is what did they go to in my sensory room? Do they go to the mats? Do they go to the beanbag? Do they go try to swing on that swing right away? And I would be watching these things for clues. Are they a little clumsy? Are they bumping into things? Can they not actually take off their jacket because they can't really feel where their body is? Can they not untie their shoes or take off their coat? All of that, I'd be watching and with a little sensory lens to say, so it's not like they can't take off, but why can't they take off their coat? Why are they going towards the swing? I'm starting to form questions and a hypothesis on the person, but watching is the most important. So that's why I need to spend time with the clients. And you can't do that in a short period of time. You need to see them also on different days so you can know what they're like. And that's why I love it. Parents and teachers know the most because they're with them all the time. And I see a tiny snapshot.
Let's ground the science without the jargon. How do you explain the 8 senses, especially touch, vestibular, and proprioception, as the base for regulation?
Yeah. When I give my course and to people, I always marvel, even the professionals, we're not sure. It's all these terms and jargon in our head. So I love that because the senses we learn in kindergarten, most of them, not all of them. And there's 8 of them. And I will go through them all if that's okay. And I'll tell you a little bit about each one. And I'm going to start with the 3 main ones. So there's the touch, vestibular, and proprioceptive senses. So the touch sense you've learned about in kindergarten. You know that is how you feel touch. But did you know there's light touch and deep touch? And people respond differently to both of those senses. Someone could be craving deep touch to help them calm down, but could not stand the light feeling of a scratchy shirt on their sleeve. Or if someone is approached with light touch, they might hit you if they're in high stress level. But they might really be craving that deep touch of like something weighted or cozy blanket around them. So that's the touch system in a nutshell. It's developing in utero when babies are developing, and it can be immediately affected when children have had hospitalizations. When adults are hospitalized, our touch system needs to be activated. We need to be touched to have it working on just right. So when there are situations that make it unsafe or you feel threatened, that can affect your touch system in a nutshell. The second most important sense is, and they're equally important, is your vestibular sense. So this sense is really like two little inner ear circular canals that sit like this in your inner ear. And they're super sensitive to sense movement. If you're off balance, if your head is tipped, if you need to recorrect. But unfortunately, some people do not feel just right on their vestibular system. So two ways, they could feel too much or too little. So a too much vestibular system would be they cannot tolerate the car or spinning or their parents bouncing them up and down. They feel sick, they cry, they don't want it. So that is either they could feel on high to linear, so back and forth like a swing, or rotational, which a lot of people can get sick quite easily from. So that's the vestibular system in a nutshell. But in a sense, what I look for is, are people feeling too much or too little? If they're feeling too much, they feel sick usually and will refuse to do something. But if they feel too little, they might go out looking for vestibular. So they'll be swinging and getting out of their chair and running and spinning, or maybe subtly moving their head and rocking in their chair. So that's already telling me that their vestibular system might not be on just right, and they're trying to get there. The third most important sense, and again, a sense you probably didn't learn about in kindergarten, is the proprioceptive sense. And this is the sense that you can feel where your body is in space with your eyes closed. So I could touch my nose with my eyes closed and not miss it. I could get to my nose. And this sense is working in the background. So most people do not know it's there. But when it's not working on just right, you know. And you know it because you're uncoordinated. You can't quite feel where your body is. You may then develop messy writing because you can't feel your hand. You might be a bit clumsy at sports because your body just doesn't sense exactly where that racket is or where that ball is. And so it's really working in the background, but it can cause a whole bunch of havoc in a kid that doesn't feel enough. So you may have someone that doesn't feel enough of their proprioceptive system. So some of them go out to get it. So they'll be leaning on things and they'll be reaching for things and looking for deep pressure because it actually gets them to just right. And someone who is really good with their purpose, so they feel a lot, these are the kids and adults that are really good at sports. They are hyper athletes and they can perform really well because they have a really good tuned sense of that. So that's in a really small nutshell, the proprioceptive system. And then we have the 5 other senses, which I'll go through just a little quicker, but you probably know most of them. The first is the taste system. And any parent or someone that knows someone that is a picky eater, as we might say, which I feel is a bit more of a negative term, but selective eaters, the way we like to say it now, is that they are sensitive sometimes to taste and it affects them so much they don't want to touch a new food and they don't want to eat certain foods and they really go after predictable foods because it feels too much in their mouth. So that's the taste system in a nutshell. But the taste system is really, really, really closely affected by the touch system. So usually when someone is having a taste difficulty, there's something going on in their touch system. The next sense is the sense of smell, which we again all know, but it's also directly related to taste. When you smell something that's not good, it's human nature and it's a protective mechanism to not eat it, right? We don't eat garbage. We don't eat food that's spoiled. But some people feel too much on this sense, and their sense of smell is so strong they can't walk into a room with certain kinds of smells. And this makes it hard. This makes it hard to be in a typical world with smells and different experiences. Again, when there's a smell sensitivity, I'm usually seeing another regulation problem in the touch, vestibular, and proprioceptive sense. There's usually something, also a clue there that something's not on just right. Then there's the auditory sense. And anyone who has been sensitive to noise or has trouble sleeping when there's noise will know this sense. When something is too loud or hurts your ears, you don't want to be there and you cover it and you move away. And this is really, really disruptive and can be really hard for someone who is feeling too much on this system to stay in a crowded place, to go to the movies, to go to the grocery store. But again, there's a clue there. When the auditory system is not on just right and responding too much on high, what might happen is, one, the person might plug their ears and make their own noises so that they can block out the other noises, right? So it looks like they're seeking auditory, but their comfort zone of auditory. And the second thing they might do is run away and leave the environment. And yet we say that's a behavior. Often they're just trying to get what they need. But that auditory system is an indicative that something's going on, most likely in the touch, vestibular, and proprioceptive sense. The next sense that's, again, important but also not as important as those three main senses, is your visual sense. And this is where you might see someone who is very overwhelmed by visual experiences. So you might say, okay, they can watch a video game and play it. By the end of that video game, they're vibrating. It's like it was too much for them. The other thing could be in a classroom or a doctor's office. So the lights, those neon lights that are so bright, take a toll on all of us. But someone who is feeling too much to their visual system might really have a lot of trouble concentrating because of that bright light. Distracting walls, busy walls, flashing lights, all of these things can be really hard, especially for someone. Autistic individuals talk about this a lot, that their peripheral vision is really, really, really strong. So they look to the side and they see all of those signs that you and I might be able to ignore and say, hey, it's a behavior, just pay attention. But that's not so easy for someone who has a really strong peripheral vision. So you can see that it can look like a behavior, but really their visual system is not on just right. But again, the clue is in the touch, vestibular, and proprioceptive sense. Also, probably dysregulation going on there. And the last sense, which is not new, but newer on the field of science in the senses, is the interoceptive system. And I have learned a lot in the last little while about that system, but it's everything to do with your internal body senses. So are you hungry, thirsty, tired? Are you feeling stress? Is your heart beating? Do you have to go to the bathroom? So to me, this is like a whole bunch of senses all in one, but I'm learning a lot about the interoceptive, and there's people doing some great work on that. And again, if the interoceptive system is not on just right, I'd be looking at the touch, vestibular, and proprioceptive systems to increase activity there to help regulate those senses, to help them be even able to feel an internal body cue. So if you don't feel good in your touch and your vestibular and your proprioceptive system, there's like very little chance you're going to be able to feel all those internal body cues, which is why you see some neurodiverse people running out of the room quickly to go to the bathroom. Or someone with ADHD has not learned to feel that cue of I've got to go to the bathroom. So it happens at the last second. Or, oops, I forgot to eat because I didn't have that internal hunger cue. And so suddenly I'm ravenous, or now I'm really in a bad mood. So in a nutshell, that is the 8 senses.
Families need usable, not perfect. When translating complex sensory science, what do you keep and what do you leave out so it stays actionable?
Right. I think I already kind of used some of the lingo, but I myself had to clarify, how do you say it and explain it to parents? And therapist, even a psychologist, a social worker, the teacher working with the child. And I really like to use the just right language theory. It's like, if you are just right on your senses, that's just right. You're able to participate, you're able to do the classroom activity, you're able to do the work, you're able to eat your meal without, disruptions. But that is just right. Anything on high would be feeling like on overload to that sense. So I really explain the senses as I did in kind of, are you just right? Are you feeling too much on high? Or are you feeling too little? Are you on low? Do you need more of it because you can't go get it yourself? So you need help getting enough? Or maybe you can go get it yourself. So you're seeking a lot of movement because you're trying to get to just right. So basically, that's the language I use. And when I think about things, I'm like, what is the person trying to get? Are they trying to get to just right? And are they going about it the right way? Or is it really disruptive and hurtful sometimes to them? So that's the theory in general. There is a lot more complexity when you go into therapy world and assessments. There's really a lot of nuances. And that is a time when you're with a therapist, an occupational therapist, especially who knows sensory, they would work on much more fine tuning of those skills. But in general, when we're trying to help our families and our teachers and our therapists have a safer sensory environment, we need to think about just right. And how do we get there?
If we walked into a space you helped set up, what would we see and why?
I like to talk about the 3 different spaces I would set up, because there's the classroom, there's a home, and then there's a therapy office or dental or medical office. But in a classroom, when I walked into a classroom, I would want to see a space in a corner or in one part of the room that is sensory safe. And by what I mean by that, I would mean that the lights are dimmer, or there's a sheet over a table, or there's a tent. There's something really comfortable to sit on, a beanbag chair, a mat, a pillow. I would want to make sure that in that space, there was access to something touch, vestibular, and proprioception. So could there be a little rocking chair or an office chair if you don't have access to a rocking chair? Could there be a weighted lap pillow or a weighted animal if it's little or kids that gives something weighted that we know activates the proprioceptive and the touch system? Is there something vibration that you can have? Like we have vibrating snakes and little sensory tubes that they can have access to, which can really help get their system to just right. So I'd really want to see a sensory safe corner. It doesn't have to be expensive. You can buy the vibration handheld tools at the pharmacist, at the drugstores. And the weighted things, I've made them before. I take a sock and I fill it with beans and I sew the end shut in dried beans, and they can wear that on them. So it can be simple, it can be inexpensive, and you can do it with an old couch cushion and an old curtain that you put over a table or an old sheet. So that would be a classroom. If it was ideal, when I walked into that classroom, there would be the sensory corner, and then there would be at least one wall when the children had to focus that had nothing on it, that just had the essentials on it, maybe the smart board where they have to focus. But there would not be artwork all around that. So someone with a very strong peripheral sense of vision would not be looking at all of that. So I would have at least one wall where they could turn when there's a test or when they need to focus to look at. So that's a nutshell in a classroom. I would also have, though, the light covers, the neon light covers. So you didn't have that strong neon light all day, and I would hope to have nice open windows. At home, there's 2 different ways. Some people live in a small apartment and they don't have a lot of space. So say they might need a removable sensory space. I still encourage that at home, there's a space somewhere that a child or adult who's feeling too much has a space to go that is sensory safe. Again, mimicking that classroom setup. Something on the floor where you can get down to the floor and feel comfortable. Maybe a rocking chair or an office chair that you can get some vestibular. Something weighted. Something vibration. Maybe noise-canceling headphones if you need to tune out the noisy family around you. But it needs to have a space that they can go to, and it's not a punishment, and it's not a reward. It's somewhere they can go when they need to regulate. Same thing in a therapist's office. When we bring our children or when we ourselves go to a doctor or a therapist, it's usually stressful, especially if you're talking psychology, social work, speech therapy. There's a lot of demands on the kids or the adults that are going there, and emotional demands, and that can trigger stress. So again, I really like to see an office, and it's not traditional. I haven't seen many people do it, but people are starting. That is not just you sitting in an office chair, that there is a place on the floor with a mat or a beanbag and all the things I talked about, maybe a weighted lap pillow so that person can feel grounded while they're talking to you or doing this hard therapy. So the same concepts, and people say, but I have a small office. I've done it in super small offices. I've redesigned with a social worker recently, and we redesigned her office. We turned off the upper lights. We brought in a lamp, and she could turn on that light. And she had the corner with her beanbag and her sensory tools. And it just changed the dynamic of her office and the feeling when you walked in. It became a really welcoming space.
And how we use tool matters. How do you coach staff to shift from earn a break to supports to do the work?
Well, one of the mottos I say is sensory is not a reward. Sensory is a human need. We would not give someone their medication because they were good or bad. We would give it because they need it. We give glasses to people who need glasses. We need to have sensory regulation opportunities for everyone in our classrooms, in our therapy offices, in our homes, because we may need it at different times. So that mindset has to shift. You don't get to go to the sensory corner because you've been good or you did your work. You get to go to the sensory corner so you can do your work, so you can be the best part of you at school, home, or therapy. And what do I do to teach it? I often reframe. So if I hear a teacher, therapist, parents say they're being bad or it's a behavior and they're trying to get me mad, I'll reframe. I'll literally say the words, you know what? It might feel that way, but they're actually telling you something. They're actually communicating something to you. If they're showing you that they're upset and they're leaving the room or your classroom, they're telling you it's too much. Now it's your detective work to learn what is too much in that classroom. And I keep saying it again. I really find that we all need more and more reminders to change how we think about certain things. So I do that a lot, and I give trainings. I find that trainings really, really help. When we speak to a group, it's like people are open to listening. And one of my favorite things I do in my course is I teach what it feels like to be sensory overwhelmed. So I do a sensory activity that makes the entire audience feel overwhelmed sensory-wise with their touch, vestibular, and proprioceptive system. And by doing that, that's when I get people believing. Because when we can really feel what it's like to be dysregulated sensory-wise, we're much more empathetic and we're much more attuned to the students and people we work with.
Let's talk about what gets labeled as behavior. How do you help adults see defiance or inattention as signals of dysregulation instead?
Well, again, I refrain and I teach the detective kind of patterns. So if someone, for example, would say, "Oh, the student's rocking in their chair all the time and they're falling off their chair," I would say, "Oh, they're rocking in their chair because they're telling you they need to rock in their chair." What is rocking? Linear vestibular, back and forth. So maybe we need to provide them with an office chair or a rocking chair that they can work at. Or they have rocking stools and they call them T-stools. There's tons of different seating opportunities for kids and adults to wiggle while they learn. So that would be one. It's again reframing why it's happening. And often when we are frustrated as an adult and don't know why something's happening, we tend to blame. Whereas if we can learn to ask a question why, I do feel we can change that negativity. Another really common one I see is they keep getting out of their chair. They're always moving. They're disrupting everyone in the classroom. And I see this a lot in the littler grades when they're learning to sit and stay still. And really, a 4-year-old can sit about 5 or 10 minutes. So that's not long. So sometimes I see circle times that last 30 minutes. Well, of course they're going to get up. And remember, that is the average child that would sit for 5 to 10 minutes. So then you have a child that needs more vestibular and more movement and more touch. So they're going to get up in that circle time and move around and maybe come up to you and touch you. And that seems annoying, but they need it. And we've got to remember the age we're working with. And if it is someone older, what is their developmental age? Then their attention and sitting ability is that age. So that's another common one I see. And I'm just saying, well, why don't we get the whole group up and move? We can all do this standing up and we can rock while we're learning about and frogs and science and whatever you're learning about. I see another one that I hear they're refusing to eat. This is common at lunchtime, sometimes at schools when kids are staying for lunch and you have the lunch monitors, or parents that are really worried about their kid not eating. And I reframe that with saying it's not refusing to eat. It's maybe they're really sensitive to their taste system. Maybe they're a super taster and they really taste the pepper in that food. Maybe their sense of smell is on high and they feel too much. They really can't stand that strong smell of fish or whatever that is. So again, it's a reframing so we can get away from forcing eating, because that does a whole other bout of damage and trauma to someone who has to eat that food before they get to go out for recess.
Support also means safety and consent. With items like weighted tools or movement activities, how do you handle dosage, consent, and group safety?
Right. The big safety concern I have is with weighted equipment. I love weighted equipment. However, there is rules, and you can never put 10%, more than 10% of body weight, on a child or adult. And especially if they are low muscle tone, they have trouble moving. So like an elderly person, for example, or a child who has motor problems. But it doesn't mean it's not good for them, but just never go up past that 10%. So with weighted stuff, that's really clear. And I don't leave them unattended, especially if we're using it in a group, in a school. You really need to be attentive. You don't just go off somewhere else while they're wrapped in a big weighted blanket and walk away, because that's when problems can happen. And they could get scared, one thing, or if they're low muscle tone or have a breathing difficulty, it could be dangerous. But the other thing I really have to be careful with, and this is consent. And everyone's like, well, how do you get consent if someone's non-speaking? And what I love and what I learned early on is that most people can tell you. I remember my grandmother in the late stages of dementia, and she couldn't speak anymore because she could barely move. But boy, did her eyes tell me what she liked and what she didn't. And she could turn her head and she could look at me and she could tell me she wanted that touch and that head rub or that massage to continue. So just because someone's non-speaking or can't move very well doesn't mean they can't tell you. So you really want to watch the eyes. The eyes that people have said are the windows to the soul. And I do believe they tell you a lot. They tell you when someone's scared. Eye contact and eye expression can really give you a lot of feedback. So I'm always watching. If I put something weighted on someone and they push it away, I take it off. Well, I'm not there to force. I'm there to expose and teach and try. And let's be a detective. I would never force weighted equipment on someone. But it doesn't mean that because they try it once, I don't try it again. Because maybe the first time they felt that weighted lizard or animal on them, they felt that light touch of the scratchy material and they couldn't tolerate it. But they really need it. So the next time we try it, they're wearing a blanket on top of them and then we put the weighted thing. And guess what? They like it. So you keep trying. You keep being a detective. And honestly, I don't always know. I have to try with the kids. The other thing is that when someone pulls away at all. So they jerk away. That is telling you something. That is consent to say, I don't like this. And it's important to respect that. And I see, unfortunately, a lot of in adult child relationships that are not the parent, that there's, by instinct, we want to touch someone to help them calm down. But that's not always the place to start. And you really need to be in a trusting relationship, because anyone who is defensive, especially to touch, will react to that. And you could traumatize them and delay all the work you do. So really important to look at the eye contact, look at the body language when you're working with someone and being that detective.
Sensory needs aren't just for kids. What does sensory safe design look like in dental or medical offices, waiting rooms, or workplaces?
Right. We talk about sensory in terms of kids, and that is an absolute myth. It is in everyone, in all age populations, in many different diagnoses and many different typical developing people have different experiences of sensory. So yes, it's not just for kids. It's all through the ages and through many different individual diagnoses. So one of the common things that is very difficult for someone with sensory difficulties, especially if they have taste and touch sensitivities, is going to the dentist. And these kids, adults, often need to be put under general anesthetic to get basic treatments, like maybe a tooth pulled, because they are so fearful and they feel so much. So they are rightfully scared because they are feeling a lot more pain or anxiety compared to someone who doesn't feel that. So that waiting room is a stressful place for a kid that knows, or an adult that knows they have to do something stressful. So that waiting room should be just like that classroom. Is there a sensory safe spot that someone can go to? And there is dental. If you Google it, you can see dental offices, especially India. They're doing a lot of this that are sensory safe. You can look at images of it. But is there a rocking chair, an office chair? You go to an office and you're sitting side by side with people stuck like this, really close contact. Is there a space they can have to relax and feel just right before they go in? Because if they're not on just right before you go in, good luck in the procedure. So again, it would be a space with maybe a mat, a washable beanbag, because I know for hygiene reasons, it can't be just material. It might need to be like a plasticized material, but you can get those. Rocking chair, office chair, just so that there's movement. Maybe if you're willing to get some of the vibration tubes and a vibrating mat, they have waterproof covers for them. Someone could go lie on it before their session. And that is sensory safe. And it's happening. If I was in the chair in a dental office, or especially a dental office, let's say, they use weight because they have to. When they're taking an x-ray, they put a weighted pad over you to take that x-ray to protect you. But it feels so good. If you've ever had it, you're like, this is great, because it's providing a proprioceptive feedback. You feel grounded. And when we're stressed, that proprioceptive feedback helps us calm down and get to just right. So I would wear that. I would have someone wear that the whole time. If I knew that they were sensory dysregulated in the dental office, that would stay on them. So that's not something new they need to buy. That would be on them. I would also possibly even have vibration tools that the person could have while they're doing, because if instead of focusing here, they could be holding that vibration tool in their hand and getting the vibration to their hand. So you know that when we have pain, we often grab something and hold it. So it would be that same kind of theory as giving them what they need so that they can cope with that stressful situation. In a medical office, it would look quite similar. I wish in most pediatric offices, waiting rooms, sometimes you're waiting a long time. And if you have a child that is neurodiverse and sensory dysregulated, that is very hard. So again, I would have the sensory space in all of these. I would have mats on the floor. I would maybe have a sensory tent that a child could go in that is calming without the bright lights of the office. And, you'd have to have safe tools. I wouldn't probably have the vibration tools and everything there, because kids can take them apart and get into trouble if they're not watched. But I would have a sensory safe space they could escape to so they could get to just right. And when you were in the office, how many times are parents listening, and while their neurodiverse child who is sensory dysregulated is running and they can't listen. So the doctor's giving them important information, but they can't listen because their child is running or crying or moving. So again, I would have a little corner with a mat, maybe a little sensory tent right in the office. I know they're small, but I've seen it done. And in that place, I might have a weighted lap pad that the child could sit on them, maybe earphones, noise canceling, so they could put them on. I would have some of those options. So it's safer for parents too, so they can be regulated themselves when they're listening to important medical information.
Words shape care. How do you keep practicing neurodiversity affirming inside medical systems that can pathologize?
Right. I've learned a lot about this and I'm continuing to learn. I know my colleagues and I practice regularly talking and learning and reading about the new neuroaffirming tools and terms to use. And one of them that I'm really using, and I think you've heard me say it here, I don't say they're non-communicative because everyone's communicating. I say non-speaking because that's very different than communicating. Because if we can blink, we're communicating. But non-speaking is not using words to speak. So that is an example of one that we're really trying to use a lot more.
Many listeners are juggling limited time and energy. What's your minimum viable plan to stabilize regulation at home or school?
Right. So there's no cookie cutter plan, and that would be unsafe to do. But if you were a parent or teacher trying to make something tomorrow, set up a sensory corner, set up a little sheet over a couch or over a table and put something comfy, put a cushion inside. That's where I would start. But you want to also think about what's going on in the touch, vestibular, and proprioceptive sense. Are you providing activities to your child that are touch, vestibular, and proprioceptive? So touch, we know that might be massage, that might be weighted equipment, which is also the proprioceptive sense. When we put weights on ourselves and move through that, we can activate. So like a hand weight, you can move through that. So think about weights, never more than 10% of the body weight. And then with vestibular, when our child is not listening and mealtime was a mess, did they move enough before dinner so that they have the ability to sit and eat their dinner? Maybe not. Well, you try again next time. Okay, maybe they need to run outside for a few minutes before, or maybe we need to spin them in an office chair for a little bit. Maybe they need to do a little jump on a trampoline, an inside one or an outside one, or a little jump on your couch, maybe holding your hands. But these activities can help regulate to just right so that, remember we talked about those other senses can be activated, like eating and smelling and tasting and all of those other senses that are important at home.
Let's end with what's next and something listeners can try. Which frontier, like interoception or stress literacy, are you most excited to develop? And what would you ask listeners to try this week?
Mm-hmm. So for myself, I'm really interested in the interoceptive system. I'm trying to understand how we can help it more and how we can teach the attunement. So I'm working with a psychologist to learn more about that and how she's implying that into her practice with her clients. And I'm also developing a talk on how stress affects sensory regulation and vice versa. How when you're not sensory regulated, it can increase your stress level. And so we say we're stressed, but maybe we're not sensory regulated, or something stressful has happened and suddenly we're not sensory regulated. So that is what I'm excited about. But for the parents, like, what can you try tomorrow? If you're a teacher listening, a therapist, become a sensory detective. Be that person that can help the person you love or are caring for or teaching figure out how to get to just right. Become that detective and don't give up. Because you didn't figure it out, try again. The tool you tried today might not work. And actually, it might work today and not work tomorrow. But be that detective. That is the one best thing you can give someone who is not able to get to just right on their own.
Cynthia, where can we find your work? or resources? And do you have any upcoming talks, trainings, or guides?
Yes, so I just recorded a 4-hour live webinar, which is on demand, and you can find that at courses.cynthiamiller-lautman.com. And I'm really excited for anyone in Montreal, Quebec. I'm giving this talk at the Teachers Convention in Montreal in November 6th at the Bonaventure Hotel. So I'm very excited for that because I love doing that to educators. You can also, I have a podcast called Swinging Upside Down, where I record about one episode a year when it's meaningful. You can find stuff there. And you can also look for me, CynthiaMiller-Lautman.com on social media.
Cynthia, thank you. Links are in the show notes, so thank you for coming.
Thank you.
If today's conversation resonated with you, remember this: you are not broken. The right support and the right systems can change everything. If you'd like to connect with today's guest, you'll find their information in the show notes. If this episode added value, share it with someone who needs it. Subscribe, leave a review, and help us continue centering lived experience and amplifying diverse minds. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep celebrating the beauty of diverse minds. Thanks for listening to the Neurodiversity Voices Podcast.